What's up, you guys? I'm Dan. This is Frugal Not Cheap. Today we'll talk about how to accelerate our savings by ignoring our raises. So today's video came about because I recently got a raise from my employer. Thank you, employer. I was sharing the good news with my mother and she asked me what I was going to do with the raise. As you can imagine, I learned a lot of sort of my spending and saving habits from my parents, and so of course the implication was, hey, you're going to save all of that, right? But looking at popular culture, that doesn't seem to be the first thought that would come to mind. Instead, a lot of the ideas that come from popular culture would have us immediately go out and spend those raises. Ideas like treat yourself, or you deserve it, or YOLO. Even more insidious ones like self-care. You know, it's been stressful getting this raise and you should be taking care of yourself by going to the spa or whatever. Now, if we're already saving a ton and, really in a rock solid financial position, then maybe this isn't so bad. But for many people, they're really just kind of treading water, or maybe slowly getting into more and more debt, or really just not making a whole lot of progress with their savings goals. And so if we were to do this, to spend all of our raises whenever they came, then the situation would never change, because as our income increases, our expenses would increase, and then we'd never be able to make any forward movement. So that's a phenomenon called lifestyle inflation. According to Investopedia, this refers to an increase in spending when an individual's income goes up. Lifestyle inflation tends to become greater every time an individual gets a raise and can make it difficult to get out of debt, save for retirement, or meet other big picture financial goals. Lifestyle inflation is what causes people to get stuck in a cycle of living paycheck to paycheck where they have just enough money to pay the bills every month. Man, yeah, that doesn't sound great at all, so why don't we make a different choice? But actually related to this idea is another one that's a little bit similar, which is called the hedonic treadmill. The hedonic treadmill, also known as hedonic adaptation, is the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events or life changes. So going back to what we might do with this raise, one of the first things that comes to mind when people think about earning more money would be getting a bigger house or a fancier apartment, maybe getting a fancier car. So all of these big events would create a lot of kind of temporary happiness, sort of this jolt that comes with making this big purchase or this increase in one's lifestyle. But according to the hedonic treadmill idea, and I've definitely observed this in my own life, is that once you get over this little peak, then things kind of come back down to where they were before, even though of course our conditions before and after are different. So you can get the fancier apartment, the bigger house, and initially you'll be really happy, but then you'll end up kind of being where you were before, most likely. So that makes it seem even worse, right? This whole idea of spending all of our raises, because then we're increasing our spending and getting this more extravagant lifestyle, but yet because of hedonic adaptation, it's not actually making us all that much happier in the long run. And while we're doing all of this, we're not making any progress towards our savings and financial goals. So what should we do instead if we want to make more progress on those financial goals is, of course, to ignore these raises in the sense of not spending them and instead taking that additional income and deploying it towards our financial goals so we can make faster progress towards them. So practically, how would that work? Well, first of all, we need to have a budget because if we don't know how much we're spending and we're not keeping track of that, then it could be very easy to fall into the lifestyle inflation, even subconsciously loosen up and spend more of this raise on our everyday expenses. But if we're keeping track with a budget, then we know we can hold those things constant and then thereby make sure that we're going to deploy the additional income towards our financial goals. So we got to have this budget and keep it the same. The next thing we should do is to have automatic savings and to increase them by the additional amount. So why automatic? This is kind of going back to that whole pay yourself first theory, or just looking at human behavior too. If you have friction, if you need to actually manually go in and make the transfer from your checking to your savings or to your brokerage account or your 401k or whatever it is, that friction is going to make it much less likely that you're going to follow through with it. Whereas if it's an automatic deduction that just happens, you don't even have to think about it, and then, you know, we spend whatever's left over, this makes life a lot simpler and makes sure that you're taking care of your goals first and then taking care of your wants later. So that's exactly what I did in my case. I have a budget. That budget is not changing with this raise. And then the additional net income, because of course there are taxes that have to be paid, the amount that my net income went up by is exactly the amount that I raised my automatic contributions by into my brokerage account. So by doing this, you know, this can be especially a powerful thing when we're younger, because there's a lot more time for a compound interest to work its magic. We can really accelerate our progress towards our financial goals. To highlight that, let's look at the goal of FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early. Let's say that we earn the median personal income in the United States, which in 2022 was $40,480. Let's say we were quite frugal and were able to save 20% of that. That'd be $8,000 a year, and I certainly did that when I was earning that amount. That means our current annual expenses, including taxes, etc., are $32,480. Assuming a 7% real return and a 4% withdrawal rate, we'd be able to retire in about 30 years. So that's pretty good. A lot of the sort of more mainstream financial professionals tend to suggest a 20% savings rate. And, you know, the typical career is between 40 to 45 years, so this is definitely doing a lot better than that. But let's say that we get a 10% raise. Our income goes up by $4,048 to $44,528. We do have to pay Uncle Sam. They're going to take 12%. So we get to keep 88% of our raise, which is $3,652. And we're going to save all of that. So our total savings go up from $8,000 to $11,562. Now our savings rate has gone from 20% up to 26%, and we've cut down the time to retirement to 26.4 years. If that doesn't sound like a huge deal, we're talking about years of our working lives. Even one single year, I think, is really a big deal. And here we're cutting it by over 4. Now let's say that this happened again. Now we're not going to get 10% raises every year, but think of this more of a shorthand way of showing what will happen with raises over time, just kind of taking a couple of snapshots. So let's say now we're earning 10% more again, but that we keep our expenses stable. And we can assume in the background that inflation is going on, by the way. So these are all in inflation adjusted terms. And that's why I use the 7% rather than 11 or 12% for the investment returns. Well, now we've got to pay 22% of our raise to the tax man, but it still enables us to jack up our savings all the way up to over $15,000 a year. Now we're saving 30% of our income, and it cuts the time to retirement down to just 24 years. So we could save almost 7 working years. 7 years by increasing our savings rate from 20% to 30%. Hopefully you find that just as motivational as I do, and a good reason why it would make sense to ignore our raises and instead boost those savings rather than spending them. Hope you found today's video helpful. If you did, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.